He had been lying in front of that house for 3 days, and no one knew why. The dog appeared on a quiet Tuesday morning, just after the sun began warming the pale wooden fences along Maple Street. A large German shepherd, older, his coat dusty from miles of travel, his ribs faintly visible beneath, fur once thick and proud. He walked slowly up the short gravel path as if he had memorized every step years ago. Then he stopped at the front porch of a modest white house with a faded American flag hanging beside the door. The dog looked at the door for a long moment. Not confused, not afraid, just certain. Then he lowered himself onto the wooden boards and waited. By afternoon, the neighbors had begun to notice him. Maple Street was the kind of place where people recognized every passing car, every mail truck, every unfamiliar face. But this dog had arrived silently, without a collar anyone recognized, without an owner calling his name. A woman watering her roses watched him from across the street. He did not bark. He did not scratch the door. He did not wander away. He simply rested his head on his front paws and faced the door as if listening for footsteps on the other side. The afternoon sun shifted slowly across the porch, warming the worn wood beneath him. Still he waited. By evening, a few more neighbors had gathered small theories. Maybe he was lost. Maybe someone abandoned him nearby. Someone left a bowl of water a few feet away. The dog drank quietly, then returned to the exact spot in front of the door. Night fell over Maple Street with the soft hum of porch lights flickering on one by one. The German shepherd did not move. The wind carried the smell of pine and distant barbecue grills drifting through the quiet neighborhood. The dog lifted his head once when a pickup truck passed, ears rising for a brief, hopeful second. But the truck continued down the street and disappeared around the corner. Slowly his ears lowered again. He rested his chin back on the wood and watched the silent door. By the second day, the neighborhood children had started whispering about him. Some called him the waiting dog. Others simply wondered who he belonged to. But anyone who looked closely could see something unusual in his eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. As if this house was not a random place he had chosen to rest. As if this porch, this door, this quiet little home on Maple Street was the end of a journey measured not in miles, but in memory. Late that afternoon, a young girl from 2 houses down finally walked close enough to notice the old metal tag hanging beneath the dog's dusty collar. The tag was scratched and weathered, the letters faded from time and rain. She knelt slowly, careful not to startle him. The German shepherd did not move away. He simply watched her with calm, tired eyes. The girl gently turned the tag with her fingers and read the single name still visible in the metal. Rex. The girl stared at the tag for a long second, brushing a little dirt away with the edge of her sleeve. The metal was cold and worn smooth by years of weather, but the name was still there, carved deep enough to survive time. Rex. She looked at the dog again, this time more carefully. Up close she could see the gray around his muzzle and the quiet patience in his eyes. This was not the restless energy of a stray animal. This was something older, something steadier. The kind of calm that comes from training and years of loyalty. The German shepherd watched her hands, but did not move. His ears lifted slightly when she spoke in a soft voice. Hello there, Rex. The name seemed to reach him in a way the other voices had not. His tail moved once against the wooden boards of the porch. Just once. Across Maple Street, the woman with the rose garden stepped closer to the sidewalk. She had been watching the dog since the first morning, and something about him never felt like abandonment. Lost dogs wandered. They searched. They barked at passing cars and strangers. This one had done none of those things. He waited, always facing the same door, always returning to the exact spot beneath the porch light every night. By the afternoon of the second day, the story of the waiting German shepherd had begun traveling quietly through the neighborhood. A man walking his golden retriever stopped to look. A delivery driver slowed his van and leaned out the window. Someone brought a small bowl of dog food and placed it gently near the steps. Rex ate slowly, politely, as if remembering rules taught long ago. Then he returned to the same place and lowered himself again in front of the door. The girl studied the tag one more time before standing up. Beneath the name Rex, there was a second line of smaller letters, almost hidden by scratches. She squinted, tilting the tag toward the sunlight. The words were faint, but still readable. United States Marine Corps K-9 Unit. The girl blinked in surprise. She had seen military tags before on television, but never on a dog sitting quietly in front of a house on her own street. She looked back toward the neighbors gathering along the sidewalk. "I think he was a military dog," she said softly. The words traveled through the small group like a quiet ripple. Suddenly, the calm posture of the German Shepherd made more sense. The way he sat alert, even while resting. The way his eyes followed small movements with quiet discipline. Late that evening, one of the neighbors took a photograph of Rex resting beneath the porch light. The picture showed the worn tag, the patient eyes, and the silent door he continued to face. The neighbor posted the image online with a short message. "Does anyone recognize this dog? German Shepherd named Rex. Marine Corps tag. Waiting outside a house on Maple Street for 2 days." A few miles away, in a small apartment lit by the soft glow of a laptop screen, a man scrolling through his phone suddenly stopped breathing for a moment when the photograph appeared. The man stared at the photograph on his phone as if the screen had suddenly become a window into the past. The image showed an old wooden porch, a faded white door, and a German Shepherd lying patiently beneath the porch light. Dusty fur, tired eyes, a metal tag resting against his chest. For a moment the room around him felt completely silent. The man leaned closer to the screen, his heart beginning to beat faster with every second. He had seen that face before. Not just once. Hundreds of times. In early morning training fields filled with mist. In long quiet nights under unfamiliar skies. In the steady loyal presence that had once walked beside him like a shadow. The name written beneath the photograph made his chest tighten. Rex. Daniel Carter did not move for a long time. The apartment around him was small and quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the laptop on the kitchen table. Outside the window, the city moved on with distant traffic and the occasional sound of a passing siren. But Daniel heard none of it. His eyes remained fixed on the photograph. The dog looked older now. The strong black saddle of fur had faded slightly with gray spreading along the muzzle. But the eyes were unmistakable. Calm. Focused. Loyal in a way that words could never fully explain. Daniel slowly reached for the coffee mug beside his laptop, but stopped halfway. His hand trembled slightly. 5 years had passed since the last time he saw that dog. 5 long years of quiet questions he never quite asked out loud. Life after the Marines had moved forward in slow, careful steps. A new apartment. A new job repairing engines at a small auto shop outside the city. Days filled with simple routines that helped him keep the past at a distance. But some memories do not fade, no matter how carefully a person tries to store them away. Especially when those memories walk on 4 paws and once knew your every step. Daniel leaned back in his chair and studied the photograph again. The caption below, it was short and uncertain. German Shepherd named Rex. Marine Corps K9 tag. Waiting outside a house on Maple Street for 2 days. Does anyone recognize him? Daniel whispered the name quietly into the empty apartment. Rex. The sound of it felt strange after so many years. He had spoken that name thousands of times before without thinking. Commands during training. Gentle praise after long days. Quiet conversations that only a loyal dog ever seemed to understand. Now the word carried something heavier. Something close to disbelief. Daniel scrolled back to the photograph again and zoomed closer. The tag hanging from the collar came into clearer view. The same tag issued by the Marine Corps K9 unit all those years ago. Scratched. Worn. But still there. Still carried like a memory that refused to disappear. Daniel sat very still for a moment. Then he reached for his phone and opened the comment section beneath the photograph. His fingers hesitated above the screen before finally typing a message. My name is Daniel Carter. I think that dog might belong to me. Daniel Carter stared at the message he had just posted beneath the photograph, his finger hovering above the screen as if the words might somehow disappear if he blinked. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside the window. For a long moment, nothing happened. The photograph of the German Shepherd remained on the screen, still lying beneath the porch light, as if time itself had slowed around him. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, studying every detail of the image again. The slope of the ears. The shape of the eyes. The way the dog rested his head low but kept his gaze fixed on the door. That posture was familiar in a way that made Daniel's chest tighten. Rex used to wait like that outside the training barracks when Daniel disappeared inside a building. Patient. Focused. Certain that eventually the door would open again. Daniel rubbed a hand across the back of his neck and exhaled slowly. 5 years was a long time for a dog. Long enough for memories to fade. Long enough for lives to move in different directions. When Rex had disappeared from the Marine Corps training base all those years ago, the official report said he had been transferred to another program. That was the explanation Daniel had been given. Military working dogs moved between assignments sometimes. It was not unusual, but something about the silence that followed had always felt unfinished. Daniel never saw Rex again after that day. No final command. No farewell. Just an empty kennel and a folded piece of paperwork that told him the dog had been reassigned somewhere else. Daniel had tried to accept it the way Marines were trained to accept many things in life. Quietly, without questions. Still, the memory of the dog had stayed with him through the years that followed. Through the move to the small apartment. Through the long days fixing engines at the repair shop. Through the quiet evenings when the apartment felt just a little too silent. The notification sound from his phone suddenly broke the stillness. Daniel looked down quickly. A reply had appeared beneath his comment. The neighbor who had posted the photograph responded almost immediately. "If you are serious, please call me. This dog has been waiting here for 3 days. Daniel stared at the message. 3 days. The number settled heavily in his mind. A dog does not sit in front of a stranger's door for 3 days without a reason. Daniel reached for his car keys resting beside the laptop. The metal jingled softly as he picked them up. He glanced once more at the photograph of the aging German Shepherd lying beneath the porch light on Maple Street. The same calm eyes. The same quiet patience. Daniel whispered the name again under his breath as if testing whether the moment was real. Rex. Then he stood, grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, and headed toward the door with a feeling he had not experienced in years. Hope. Daniel Carter drove through the quiet streets long after most of the city had gone to sleep, the headlights of his truck cutting narrow paths through the darkness. Maple Street was nearly 2 hours away from his apartment, but the distance felt strangely shorter tonight, as if the miles themselves understood the urgency inside his chest. The highway stretched out in long silver lines beneath the tires while the dashboard clock slowly crept forward. Daniel kept one hand steady on the wheel while the other rested near his phone, the photograph of the German Shepherd still open on the screen beside him. Every few minutes he glanced down at it again. The same worn porch. The same silent dog waiting by the door. He had seen Rex wait like that before. Years ago on a quiet training field just outside the Marine base in North Carolina. Daniel would step into a building while Rex stayed outside, sitting perfectly still beside the door, eyes fixed on the entrance as if the world itself paused until his handler returned. Rex had never been the loudest dog in the unit. Some of the others barked or paced when separated from their handlers. Rex simply waited. Calm. Certain. Loyal in a way that did not require noise. The memory made Daniel tighten his grip on the steering wheel. The highway lights passed overhead one by one like slow-moving stars. He tried to prepare himself for the possibility that he was wrong. 5 years changes many things. Dogs age. Faces change. Memories sometimes play tricks on tired hearts. But something about those eyes in the photograph had felt unmistakable. Daniel could still remember the first day he met Rex. The dog had been younger then, powerful and alert, standing beside the training instructor with ears forward and tail steady. When Daniel approached, Rex had studied him for several quiet seconds before stepping closer and pressing his nose briefly against Daniel's hand. The instructor had smiled and said that sometimes a dog chooses the handler before the handler chooses the dog. Daniel had laughed at the time, but the years that followed proved the instructor might have been right. The truck rolled off the highway exit and onto smaller county roads surrounded by dark fields and quiet trees. The town ahead was asleep except for the occasional porch light glowing softly in the distance. Daniel checked the address from the message again. Maple Street was only a few minutes away now. His heart began beating a little faster as he turned onto the narrow residential road lined with small houses and tall oak trees. The truck slowed as he approached the familiar number posted beside a white mailbox. Daniel parked along the curb and turned off the engine. For a moment he did not move. The porch light ahead glowed softly against the dark night air. Beneath it, a large German Shepherd still lay quietly on the wooden boards exactly as he had in the photograph. Rex had not left the door. Daniel Carter sat motionless behind the steering wheel for several long seconds, his eyes fixed on the porch ahead. The soft yellow porch light spilled across the wooden boards and illuminated the familiar outline of the German shepherd lying near the door. Time seemed to slow in the quiet neighborhood. The oak trees along Maple Street barely moved in the cool night air, and the only sound came from the faint ticking of Daniel's truck engine as it cooled. He studied the dog carefully from across the street, his heart beating harder with every passing second. The dog looked older than the Rex he remembered. The powerful frame was still there, but it carried the weight of years now. Gray fur touched the muzzle, and the once thick coat showed the thin marks of long travel. Yet the posture was unmistakable. The dog lay facing the door, alert even while resting, ears shifting slightly at distant sounds. That quiet discipline was something Daniel had seen thousands of times before. Rex had always rested like that, ready but calm, as if he understood patience better than most people ever could. Daniel slowly opened the truck door and stepped out onto the pavement. The cool night air brushed across his face, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and distant pine trees. His boots touched the ground softly as he closed the door behind him. The small sound echoed through the quiet street. On the porch, the German shepherd's ears lifted immediately. The dog did not stand yet. He simply raised his head and looked toward the sound. Daniel froze beside the truck. For a moment, neither of them moved. 20 yards separated the man from the porch. 20 yards filled with 5 years of silence. Daniel could see the dog's eyes now reflecting the porch light. The German shepherd watched him carefully, head tilted slightly, as if studying something deep inside memory. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He had imagined this moment many times in the years since Rex disappeared, but now that it was real, he suddenly felt unsure how to move. Slowly he began walking across the street. Each step felt heavier than the last. The gravel along the path crunched softly beneath his boots as he approached the house. The German shepherd remained still, but his ears rose higher now, his nose lifting into the night air. Dogs remember the world through scent more clearly than through sight. The wind shifted gently across the porch, carrying with it the faint smell of motor oil, worn leather, and the familiar trace of a man who had once spent every day beside him. The dog's body stiffened slightly. Daniel stopped at the edge of the yard. The porch was only a few steps away now. The German shepherd slowly pushed himself up from the wooden boards. His legs trembled slightly with age, but he stood tall, eyes locked on the figure approaching from the darkness. Daniel's voice came quietly, almost a whisper carried by the night air. Rex. The name drifted across the quiet yard like a memory waking from sleep. Rex. The German shepherd stood frozen on the porch, his body tense but not afraid. His ears remained upright, turning slightly as the sound settled into the night air. For a few seconds nothing moved. The dog studied the man standing near the edge of the yard, his eyes searching the shape of the figure, the posture, the faint rhythm of breathing carried by the wind. Daniel Carter did not step closer yet. He simply stood beneath the dim streetlight, allowing the moment to unfold slowly. He knew that recognition for a dog did not arrive all at once. It came through layers of scent and sound, through pieces of memory that had lived quietly inside the animal for years. Rex lifted his nose higher and drew in the cool air again. The night breeze carried the familiar scent toward him more clearly now. Motor oil, worn leather, the faint trace of a man who had once walked beside him through countless early mornings and long days of training. Something shifted inside the dog's expression. The calm focus in his eyes changed, softening in a way that had not appeared during the 3 days he waited on that porch. His tail moved once behind him, just a small motion at first, as if testing whether the feeling inside him was real. Daniel took one slow step forward. The gravel beneath his boot made a quiet crunch that echoed gently in the still neighborhood. Rex's ears twitched again. The dog leaned forward slightly, studying the man more closely now. Memory works differently for animals. They do not measure time the way people do. 5 years may pass for a human like chapters in a long story, but for a loyal dog the memory of a trusted voice can remain as clear as the last command spoken yesterday. Daniel's voice came again, low and steady, the same tone he had used thousands of times on quiet training fields. Rex, it is me. The German shepherd's body stiffened for one long second as the sound reached him. Then something remarkable happened. The dog's tail began to move again, this time with more certainty. Slowly at first, brushing gently against the wooden porch boards. His ears remained forward, and his eyes widened slightly, as if the final piece of a long puzzle had just fallen into place. Daniel could see the recognition now. The dog stepped forward cautiously, his paws touching the porch boards with quiet determination. The years had made his movements slower, but the purpose behind them was unmistakable. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched the old German Shepherd descend the single step from the porch and take a few careful steps into the yard. The distance between them was closing now, one quiet step at a time. Rex paused halfway across the lawn, studying the man once more beneath the dim light of the street lamp. Daniel knelt slowly onto one knee, lowering himself to the dog's level the same way he had done many times before. The moment stretched across the silent yard as the old German Shepherd took another step forward, his tail now moving gently behind him, his eyes locked onto the man he had once followed everywhere. The old German Shepherd took another slow step across the grass, his eyes never leaving the man kneeling beneath the streetlight. The night air was still, the quiet neighborhood holding its breath as if even the wind understood the importance of the moment unfolding in the small yard. Rex moved carefully now, each step measured but certain, his body guided by something deeper than sight. The scent in the air had grown stronger with every step forward. Beneath the cool smell of grass and distant pine trees was the unmistakable trace of someone he had known better than anyone else in the world. Daniel Carter remained on one knee, his hands resting gently on his thighs, careful not to rush the moment. He knew Rex well enough to understand that the dog needed time to finish recognizing him completely. Dogs remember through layers of scent, tone, and movement, each piece slowly fitting together until the past suddenly becomes the present again. Rex stopped a few feet away and studied Daniel's face in the soft glow of the street lamp. The years had changed the man as well. There were faint lines near his eyes now and a quiet heaviness in his posture that had not been there when they first trained together. But the voice was the same, the scent was the same, and the calm patience in the man's body language spoke in a language Rex had understood since the very beginning. Daniel slowly extended one hand forward, palm open, the same simple gesture he had used the first day they met. Rex leaned his head slightly closer, nostrils flaring gently as he breathed in the scent resting on Daniel's skin. For a brief second the dog froze. Then his entire body seemed to soften at once. The tail behind him began moving more freely now, brushing the grass. In steady rhythm, Rex stepped forward until his nose finally touched Daniel's outstretched hand. The contact was quiet and gentle, but it carried the weight of 5 long years. Daniel felt the familiar warmth of the dog's breath against his fingers, and a smile slowly formed across his face. "There you are, buddy," he whispered softly. Rex lifted his head slightly and studied Daniel again, this time with complete recognition shining clearly in his eyes. The dog took one more step forward and pressed his muzzle gently against Daniel's chest, as if confirming what his heart had already decided. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to the back of Rex's neck, fingers resting against the thick fur just behind the collar where the worn metal tag still hung. The old German Shepherd leaned into the touch, his tail wagging more openly now, the quiet discipline of waiting finally replaced by relief. For 3 days he had watched that silent door, believing the person he waited for might walk through it. Now the door no longer mattered. The man he had searched for was kneeling right in front of him. Daniel Carter kept one hand resting gently against the back of Rex's neck, his fingers slowly brushing through the familiar thick fur, while the old German Shepherd leaned closer into him. The quiet yard held a strange stillness now, as if the world itself had softened to give space to the moment. Rex remained pressed against Daniel's chest, breathing slowly, his tail moving in a steady rhythm behind him. The dog's body carried the marks of time and travel, but the loyalty inside him felt unchanged. Daniel lowered his forehead slightly until it touched the top of Rex's head for just a brief second. The familiar scent of the dog filled the cool night air around them, bringing back memories that had lived quietly in the corners of his mind for years. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Rex shifted his weight and stepped back half a pace, lifting his head again to study Daniel's face carefully in the porch light. His ears twitched slightly, as if listening for something beyond the moment. Daniel noticed the movement and followed the direction of the dog's gaze toward the quiet house behind them. The white front door remained closed, the porch light glowing softly above it. Daniel slowly stood to his feet, while Rex turned and looked back toward the door he had been guarding for 3 long days. The dog walked a few steps toward the porch and stopped near the wooden boards where he had been lying earlier. His head tilted slightly, and he glanced back at Daniel as if silently asking him to follow. Daniel walked up beside him, his boots stepping onto the porch with a quiet creak from the old wood. The door in front of them looked ordinary, the same kind of door that stood on thousands of houses across the country. Yet Rex had chosen this one. Daniel studied the small details around it. The faded American flag hanging beside the frame. A brass mailbox mounted near the handle. A welcome mat that had seen better days. Rex stepped closer to the door and sat down calmly beside it again. The same position he had held for days before Daniel arrived. His tail rested quietly on the boards now, but his eyes remained fixed on the door. Daniel frowned slightly, confusion beginning to mix with the relief in his chest. "Why this house, buddy?" he murmured softly. Rex responded by lifting his nose toward the door again and letting out a soft breath as if the answer lived somewhere inside the wood itself. Daniel glanced down at the worn tag hanging from the dog's collar and gently turned it with his fingers. The metal glinted in the porch light as the engraved letters caught his eye again. Rex, United States Marine Corps K-9 Unit. Daniel looked back toward the closed door. Rex had waited here with complete certainty, as if this place mattered. The quiet street remained still around them, while Daniel raised his hand slowly and knocked once against the door. The sound of Daniel Carter's knuckles against the wooden door echoed softly through the quiet porch. The knock was not loud, but in the stillness of Maple Street, it seemed to travel farther than expected. Rex remained seated beside him, his body calm yet alert, eyes fixed on the door as if he had already lived this moment many times in his mind. Daniel waited, listening carefully. Inside the house, there was no immediate movement. No footsteps. No shifting shadows beneath the door. Just silence resting quietly behind the wood. The porch light hummed faintly above them. Daniel glanced down at Rex, who still sat perfectly straight beside the door like a guard who had finally been relieved of a long watch. The old German shepherd lifted his nose toward the door again, breathing slowly as if confirming that the scent he had followed across miles still lived somewhere inside the house. Daniel knocked again, slightly firmer this time. A few seconds passed before a faint sound finally stirred from within the house. A slow shuffle of footsteps approached from the hallway beyond the door. Rex's ears lifted instantly. His tail moved once against the porch boards, not with excitement, but with quiet recognition. The door handle turned slowly, and the door opened a few inches. A soft yellow light spilled into the night air as an elderly man appeared in the doorway. His hair was thin and silver, and he wore a loose flannel shirt over simple work pants. For a moment he looked confused, his eyes adjusting to the darkness outside. Then he noticed the large German shepherd sitting beside Daniel. The old man's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened, and his hand tightened slightly against the doorframe. Rex stood up slowly when the door opened, his posture respectful and calm, the same discipline that had guided him through years of training still present in every movement. The dog studied the man in the doorway carefully, tilting his head just slightly, as if searching through distant memories. The elderly man leaned forward a little, disbelief slowly spreading across his face. His voice came out quiet and almost breathless. Rex? The German shepherd's ears rose higher at the sound of the name, spoken in that familiar tone. His tail began to move again, slower but steady. Daniel watched the exchange carefully, realizing that Rex had not come here by accident. The old man stepped fully onto the porch now, his eyes moving from Rex to Daniel with confusion and curiosity. "I cannot believe this," he said softly. "I thought he was gone years ago." Daniel felt the weight of those words settle heavily in the quiet night. He looked down at Rex again, understanding beginning to form slowly in his mind. The dog had not simply been waiting for any door to open. Rex had come here because someone inside this house mattered to him too. The elderly man stepped one pace closer onto the porch, his eyes never leaving the German shepherd standing quietly in front of him. The porch light cast a soft glow across Rex's aging coat, highlighting the gray along his muzzle and the calm patience in his posture. For a moment, the old man simply stared, as if he were afraid that even blinking might make the dog disappear again. Rex watched him carefully, his tail moving in slow, steady sweeps against the wooden boards. The scent drifting from the man standing in the doorway carried something familiar, something buried deep inside the dog's memory. The old man slowly lowered himself down onto one knee, his movements careful with age but guided by a powerful recognition in his eyes. Rex tilted his head slightly and stepped closer. The man extended his hand just as Daniel had done earlier, his fingers trembling faintly in the porch light. Rex leaned forward and pressed his nose gently against the offered hand. The old man let out a soft breath that sounded almost like a laugh mixed with disbelief. "I knew that nose anywhere," he whispered quietly. Daniel stood nearby, watching the moment unfold with growing understanding. The old man lifted his eyes toward him and spoke again, still keeping one hand resting against Rex's neck. "My name is Walter Hayes," he said gently. "I helped train this dog years ago when he first came through the Marine Corps program." Daniel felt a small wave of surprise move through him. Walter Hayes looked down at Rex again, his expression softening even further. He was one of the best young shepherds we ever worked with. Smart, calm, loyal beyond words. The old man slowly rubbed behind Rex's ears, and the German shepherd leaned into the touch with quiet contentment. Rex had clearly remembered him too. Daniel stepped closer and spoke softly. "I am Daniel Carter. I was Rex's handler during our unit training." Walter nodded slowly, as if the pieces of the story were finally settling into place. "That explains it," he said quietly. Rex always had a special bond with his handler. Dogs like him never forget their people. Walter looked back at the house behind him and then down at Rex again. "I moved here about 2 years ago after retiring from the training facility. I never expected to see one of the dogs again, especially not him." Rex sat calmly between the two men now, his tail brushing the porch floor with quiet satisfaction. Daniel glanced at the old metal tag hanging from the dog's collar and gently touched it again. "5 years ago I was told he had been reassigned somewhere else," Daniel said. "I never knew where he ended up." Walter sighed softly, his hand still resting on Rex's back. "Sometimes working dogs get transferred through several programs when units change. But dogs like Rex always carry one thing with them wherever they go." Daniel looked down at the loyal shepherd sitting beside him. "What is that?" he asked quietly. Walter smiled gently and answered in a voice filled with quiet certainty. "The memory of home." Walter Hayes remained kneeling on the porch with one hand resting gently against Rex's shoulder while the quiet night wrapped around the three of them. The porch light hummed softly above the door, and the air carried the faint scent of pine drifting through Maple Street. Rex sat calmly between the two men, his tail resting on the wooden boards now, the long watch finally over. Daniel Carter leaned back against the porch railing for a moment, letting everything settle into place inside his mind. 5 years of questions had quietly followed him through life, and somehow they had all led back to this small house with a faded flag beside the door. Walter slowly stood up, brushing his hands together as he looked down at Rex again. The old trainer smiled gently, the kind of smile that comes from seeing something rare and deeply familiar. "You know," Walter said softly, "dogs like Rex do not measure life the way we do. They measure it through people, through voices, through places where they once felt they belonged." Daniel looked down at the German shepherd sitting beside him. Rex lifted his head slightly when he heard Daniel's voice again. The dog's eyes were calm now, the long search finally finished. Daniel crouched down beside him and gently scratched behind his ears. The familiar gesture made Rex lean closer, his tail brushing lightly against the porch floor once again. "I still cannot believe you found your way back," Daniel murmured quietly. Walter folded his arms loosely and looked out toward the dark street for a moment. The neighborhood remained peaceful and still, as if nothing extraordinary had happened here at all. But Walter understood what Daniel was only beginning to realize. Dogs like Rex do not simply wander into the past by accident. They follow memory. They follow scent. And sometimes they follow something even deeper than that. Walter turned his gaze back toward the two of them. "When Rex first trained with us, he always had the strongest tracking instincts of any dog in his group. If he caught a scent once, he could follow it for miles without hesitation." Daniel nodded slowly, remembering the early training days clearly now. Rex had always been the most focused dog on the field, the one that never seemed to lose direction no matter how complicated the path became. Walter gestured gently toward the quiet street beyond the porch. Wherever Rex has been all these years, he must have carried your scent in his memory the entire time. Eventually something led him back to this town. And when he reached the place where he last knew both of us, he simply waited. Daniel looked down at Rex again, his hand resting on the worn metal tag hanging from the dog's collar. The old German shepherd leaned calmly against his leg, breathing slow and steady now. For the first time since Daniel had arrived, Rex closed his eyes briefly as if allowing himself a moment of rest. The search that had guided him across so many miles was finally complete. Daniel smiled quietly and placed his hand gently against the side of Rex's neck. "Looks like you made it home after all, partner." The night had grown deeper over Maple Street, and the quiet neighborhood now rested beneath a sky scattered with slow-moving clouds and faint stars. The porch light above the door continued to glow warmly, casting a gentle circle of light around the three figures who had somehow found their way back to one another. Rex lay stretched across the wooden boards now, his head resting comfortably against Daniel Carter's boot. The old German shepherd's breathing had become slow and steady, the kind of calm that only comes when a long journey has finally reached its end. Daniel sat beside him on the porch step, one hand resting lightly on the dog's back, feeling the rise and fall of each peaceful breath. For the first time since he arrived, the tension that had followed him for years began to fade quietly from his shoulders. Walter Hayes leaned against the porch railing, watching the scene with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had spent a lifetime working with loyal animals. He had seen many good dogs pass through the Marine Corps training fields, but moments like this were rare even for someone with decades of experience. Rex had done something that could not be taught in any training program. He had followed memory. Daniel looked down at the worn metal tag resting against Rex's collar and gently turned it between his fingers. The engraved letters caught the soft porch light once more. Rex, United States Marine Corps K-9 Unit. The tag had traveled across years and miles without losing its purpose, much like the dog wearing it. Daniel smiled faintly and scratched the side of Rex's neck again. The German shepherd responded with a small movement of his tail, but did not open his eyes. He no longer needed to watch the door. The waiting was finished. Walter spoke quietly after a moment, his voice carrying the calm tone of someone who had long ago learned to appreciate simple endings. Some soldiers come home after a long journey. Some do not. But every once in a while, one of them finds the road again. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding the meaning behind the words without needing anything more explained. Rex had spent years somewhere out in the wide world, moving through places and people that neither of them would ever fully know. Yet through all of it the dog had carried something constant inside him. A memory of voices. A memory of trust. A memory of belonging. The porch grew quieter as the night deepened. A soft breeze moved through the oak trees along Maple Street, rustling the leaves with a gentle whisper. Rex shifted slightly in his sleep and pressed a little closer against Daniel's leg. Daniel rested his hand on the dog's back again and looked out toward the silent street. Then he spoke softly, not as a command, not as a question, but as something closer to gratitude. "Welcome home, partner."